Once again, I, Lal Hare Murari Nasadev, call you all students to convene together to talk upon the chapter A Hero. This chapter has been written by a great writer, a great novelist, a short story writer, and he is well known not only in India, rather whole of the world. But basically, he is an Indian by birth, and he is R.K. Narayan. He is an Indo-Anglian writer who has written many books, many novels, and those novels have been made into many films. For example, The English Teacher, The Man Eater of Malgudi, A Tiger for Malgudi, The Guide, The Vendor of Sweets. These are many novels which have been converted into films. Once upon a time, The Guide used to be most famous. Everywhere, in all nook and corner, you could listen the songs from that picture. You find this picture to be appreciable even today. Those who have some special liking for songs, they go back to that picture and try to enjoy the pleasing sounds which perhaps not be found in any other pictures of today. That sweetness is there. A classicality is found in the songs which you listen in in the film A Hero. Sorry, The Guide. This is what you find about this great writer. Now it's better to come to talk about the chapter which we have to take next. We have already studied at least two chapters from the prescribed syllabus for Standard 7. Now it is the third chapter, A Hero. Now let us see what is in this chapter. See here the story. What we find that there is a lawyer and he has his small son, about 7, 8 years, 6 years, and this child is undoubtedly a very clever child. But before we come to his qualities, let us see how the story starts. The father of this child, whose name is Swami here, was reading a newspaper, and when he looked at the child, he raised his eyes from the newspaper and then looked towards Swami. He wanted to tell a piece of information which was given in the newspaper about the bravery of a small child. He called Swami and told him that a small boy who was really brave, when he was coming back his home through the path of forest of the jungle, came across a tiger He didn't lose courage. He fought with it, and to keep himself safe, he climbed up a tree, and there he stayed for almost half a day. And after that span of time, some villagers came to the place and killed the tiger. This information given in that newspaper was really true for the father. Father was convinced, he believed that what was given there in that newspaper, that was really true. But when he asked Swami to speak something about that information, about the bravery of the child, Swami was not ready to accept what had been stated. He said that the child must have been, that the person must have been very strong and grown up, not at all a boy. In his opinion, the person who had fought the tiger must not be a child, because in his opinion, how could it be possible that a child could fight a strong animal, almost the strongest of the animals? But the father looked, looked at the child disgustedly in a scornful manner. He pointed out one thing, that a man may have the strength of an elephant and yet be a coward, whereas another may have the strength of a straw, but if he has courage, he can do anything. In the opinion of the father, courage was everything, and strength and age were not important. But that was not exactly the same for Swami. Swami disputed the theory. He said that even if he tried to fight with the tiger, how could he? In case the tiger would attack upon him. When he contradicted the information given in the newspaper and read out by his father to him, the father tried to keep that information aside, and then he challenged his son, saying that if it was not the strength which he had, at least he must prove his courage. And then he asked him to sleep alone in his office room from that night onwards. This challenge was really very tough for the child Swami, because Swami had been sleeping with his granny in the passage, and he didn't want any kind of change in that arrangement. If any different arrangement had been done or could be done, that even the possibility of that different arrangement of sleeping alone made him trembling and didn't allow him to have a sound sleep at night. He would keep awaking all night. That was the real situation. But There was one hope in his mind that what the father said that must have been stated jokingly. And so he simply, in very low sound, confirmed, said he would do the same. But one thing more, he tried to change the course of discussion. He said that to show his courage, he had already an idea in his mind. And it's not only the idea of his, rather, his friends also had the enthusiasm to show their abilities. And for that reason, they had decided, they had decided to invite their seniors to play the game with those grown up persons, the great cricketers of his time, of his place, of his locality. And he stated that they had already bought brand new bats and balls. And that information he himself wanted to intimate to his father. And now it was the right time that he had to do it. But the father was also very clever, much more than his son. When he found that his son was changing the talk, he suggested him not to do that. He interrupted him while he was talking about his captain's information, which had to be given to his father. And simply he commanded that if he wanted to prove his courage, he must sleep alone in his office room. The child Swami, he wanted to get some respite, at least he wanted to have some time, because that time could either make his father's mind oblivious of what he wanted his son to do, to sleep alone, or even if that weren't, then he would get the time to prepare himself for sleeping alone. For that reason, he proposed that he would sleep in his office room, but from the first of next month. That's what he said. But the father was quite firm. The father, if once he fixed the time that night, then from that night he had to sleep alone in his office. He went to the extent of saying that it was disgraceful sleeping beside grandmother or mother like a baby. He reminded him that he was a student of Standard 2, and for that reason his bringing up must have some dignity. At present, the way of his looking after was not satisfactory to him. And saying so, that he didn't like the way he was being brought up, he looked at Swami's mother. His Swami's mother was already rocking the cradle of the next child in the house of Swami. She got a bit annoyed to listen it, that the way of bringing up of Swami was not up to mark. She considered that she was being hinted at, that she was not looking after the child properly. So she looked at Swami's father and refuted his point outrightly, saying that he must not look at her because she knew nothing at all about the boy. The father, when he was caught in his own trap, he tried to make an excuse. He said that he didn't mean her, and the lady got the opportunity once again. She said that if he did mean that his mother was spoiling the child, Swami, then he must talk to her, must not look at her. In this way, Swami's mother seemed to be very bold, and the father appeared to be a bit timid. After that, Swami's father sat sadly, again looking at the newspaper. Swami got the chance. He tried to leave the place without making any kind of sound from his feet. He moved to the passage where he was sleeping with his grandmother in her bed. And there he tried to cover himself up with a sheet. When the grandmother looked at him sleeping, she asked whether he was very sleepy and if he didn't like to listen the story. Swami made many gestures to keep the grandmother silent. But grandmother hardly knew what he was beating a bush about, what he was hinting at. But grandmother once again suggested him not to cover his face. But the Swami was not in a mood to listen at all. He requested her to shut up her mouth and not to talk at all to him. He asked his grandmother, not any other person also, to be allowed to call him. He said that even in case of any emergency, he must not be disturbed. Perhaps this much won't be sufficient for the grandmother. For that reason, he said that if he couldn't sleep properly, then he could even die. And this much was enough to keep the grandmother shut up her mouth, because grandmother could never think of the death of her most loving grandchild Swami. But his covering himself under the seat upon the bed could not be very rapturous for him for any longer, because father appeared before him and then commanded him to get up. At this point, the father didn't seem to be a father for Swami. He appeared, Swami's father appeared to be an apparition, a kind of very devil person, very devilish in nature. He seemed to be very cruel, not having the heart of a father in truth. And For that reason, Swami again changed his side and groaned, made some kind of sound which is sometimes heard from a sleeping man. But father repeated the same command to get up, and then the grandmother, who knew something about her grandson, she inquired of her son why he was disturbing the child. But the father of Swami didn't want to listen any talk about Swami, except that he would get up and go to his office room to sleep. So it was third time when he commanded Swami to get up. He had understood that Swami was pretending of sleeping on the bed. In reality, he was not in sound sleep, as he had made an excuse to. Finding no way out, Swami had to wake up. He had to come out of the bed, and just as he came out of the bed, the father rolled his bed, took it, took it under his arm, and moved to his office room. Swami tried to find any kind of solution which could stop the command of the father. So he looked at his granny, his grandmother, and grandmother, since she knew that her words didn't have any appeal in her son's ear, so she didn't speak anything. But again, if one trial had failed, Swami tried to use another appeal, and this time he looked at his mother. And the mother, when he found that child was hesitant in going to the office room of Swami's father, she asked him why was he taking him to the office room. She suggested that he could sleep in the hall, and that would perhaps be better. So this is what we find up to page number 3. Now remaining part we will do in our next video, and then we will move to a kind of summary or synopsis type of analysis of this chapter, and then we would move to question answers. Today children, you remember up to here? I expect you must have understood everything, and if not, then again after completion of the remaining 3 pages, I'll give you a detailed analysis, a kind of crux of the chapter in short, that may again remind you of all the things which you had studied either up to here or even much more than this. It's alright. Thank you today. Let's wait for the next part of the story.